Hi everyone, I'm Kaius. In last year's Halloween video, something you might find I'm going to bring up a lot this month, I can't help but realise that I completely forgot to bring up a specific creepypasta. Granted, I think this is because when I read it I was a teenager, so it wasn't something that quote unquote scared me as a kid, but I still don't think it deserves to be ignored. Sonic.exe is the story in question. Sonic.exe is a creepypasta that treads familiar territory to the ever-famous Ben Drowned, being about a haunted video game that wasn't unlike basically every other haunted cartridge or lost episode pasta you had ever read. Sonic.exe follows a guy named Tom as he is sent an evil copy of Sonic 1 on a PC disc from a friend who has been missing for 2 weeks, along with a note that begs Tom to destroy the CD and not to play the video game inside it. So Tom plays the video game anyway because nothing says I love my best friend like disrespecting his dying wish after he's been missing for 2 weeks. And then scary things ensue. I'm gonna assume you've read it already, and if you haven't, you're not missing out. It didn't age very well, which says a lot given that it was pretty dated, even when it was first published. Sonic.exe is a creepypasta that can charitably be described as fucking crap. It was written poorly, had a lot of cliches even for the time, a protagonist who is simultaneously cartoonishly incompetent yet able to measure time to the split second, and a generally poor execution. What little mystique and intrigue the original story provided was completely tarnished by a sequel that was unambiguously worse. Oh, there was also a game, but you were mostly just holding right the entire time, so it's not really worth talking a lot about, but it did accurately portray the creepypasta down to the specific seconds, which is kind of impressive attention to detail despite it acknowledging one of the more egregious aspects of the original story. By all accounts, after 2013, people should have forgotten about Sonic.exe. But for some reason he's completely returned to the spotlight. Who could have Friday Night Funkin? Before we continue, videos like this one are made possible thanks to my supporters for Twitch and Patreon via the Kaius Klub R program. Thank you to my patrons, Penrost and Phenomenal. The rest of this month's supporters are on screen now. You can join Kaius Klub R for Twitch for exclusive emotes, or for Patreon for verbal shoutouts, with access to a special hidden channel in my Discord server to all people who join Kaius Klub R, no matter what platform they show their support through. Well, there are multiple factors as to why Sonic.exe came back from the dead, not necessarily counting the witty in the room. I also think the rise of analog horror for the 2020s really helped Sonic.exe. Now, that's not to say I think Sonic.exe is analog horror itself, though I also happen to think that genre delineation is an inherently reductive and outdated foundation built entirely upon semantics, and acknowledging the existence of genre when discussing these things forces us into a situation where we have to acknowledge that someone is making arbitrary rules about how art is categorized, and that's not really interesting or engaging. And yes, I just flew off the rails, and yes, I just made a statement that implies Sonic.exe can be considered art, and if you have such a problem with either of those things, then why not subscribe to teach me a fucking lesson? Anyway, the point is that even outside of the aforementioned arbitrary rules defining these genres, they have charm points that aren't exactly mutually exclusive, and while it's kind of nebulous to describe, the fact that an analog take on the original story beat for beat could work is kind of what I'm getting at here. And that's actually a thing that some new adaptations of the work are doing. Basically, creating horror stories centered around old media or forms of media is kind of in vogue right now. And by some stroke of luck, Sonic.exe happens to fit exactly that. Also, as hinted at before, there's Friday Night Funkin, which arguably did more of the heavy lifting, but I'm in my mid-20s, so I'd rather not talk about it. Don't get me wrong, it's impressive. Lots of things about that game's community are, but I feel like I kinda missed the boat there. Though I guess before I forget about the analog horror angle, as I already mentioned, It is something that people are exploring, as you could see with Shut Up Jojo's Needle Mouse series. It's one of the more notable non-game retakes of Sonic.exe, but I'm not going to talk about it in too much depth because Shut Up Jojo doesn't seem to be very proud of it, and I would rather respect their work by drawing attention to their other stuff instead, such as Speedway 64. A take on Sonic.exe that leans into not only digital horror with its old unregistered Hypercam 2 aesthetic, but also the bizarre old web aesthetic of Weirdcore, an aesthetic I want to make an entire video about one day, so I'll just give you the Cliff Notes version. Weirdcore is an aesthetic that leans on nostalgia, confusion and surrealism, and a personal favourite aesthetic of mine. It combines amateurish or lo-fi images with some other typically virtual element that doesn't really make sense, such as a strange shape or text that presents an open-ended or otherwise nonsensical statement. There's also usually an emphasis on liminal spaces and nonsensical locations, which kinda puts it in a Venn diagram with other aesthetics like Dreamcore, Old Web and liminal space stuff. Now that I'm saying this out loud, I'm realising that Weirdcore is a hard aesthetic to actually describe, but if you've ever looked at the Museum of Anything Goes, it's kinda like that. It's not really sensical and it just speaks for itself. It's like Windows Longhorn and the Backrooms had a very quirky child. Anyway, I can't really describe why this aesthetic combination between Sonic.exe and Weirdcore works so damn well, but it does. Speedway 64 is a series that, much like Weirdcore, can often feel very scattered and confusing, but I don't think that's to its detriment. It's clear that the intent is to create an air of unsettling intrigue and offer a window into a story we were never supposed to be a part of. I think I'll do a more in-depth look into this one in the future when it's in a more complete state and or when I have enough time to actually unpack all of it, because there's a lot to this thing that I'm not really able to explain here. Sonic.exe just kinda happened to penetrate the zeitgeist at the exact right time, and along with these other points, it's helped in no small part by Luigi Kid, who I found while researching this piece, and learned that he hosts an annual EXE challenge where people can create their own EXE inspired games and even win money if the product is impactful enough. I think this part is worth noting not only because it helped people see more Sonic.exe stuff, but it's actively encouraging others to contribute their own pieces, and honestly, hot take, I think things that encourage people to be creative are good. I've decided to dedicate an entire section to the fan games themselves as they're, well, you know, there's a lot of them. I obviously can't cover every single one of them, so I'm going to cover some of the particularly notable ones or some other ones I've taken a liking to. It's worth noting that many of these games aren't presented as is, and may have their own backstory provided outside of the game itself. In the interest of kayfabe, I'm going to share these backstories with you and present them as fact, at least until it becomes necessary to talk about the game's story from a metatextual standpoint. Also, I'm not going to go into intimate detail about the games, as your average Sonic.exe session should only last about 20 to 30 minutes, and if you're interested, you really should just check them out for yourself. Also, as a general content warning, Sonic.exe fan games typically contain blood, gore, body horror, and jump scares. These fan games always have content warnings at the start, for a reason. One of them even says you shouldn't play the game if you're pregnant, so go down in the comments and tag an outfit who's always waking up pregnant. PC port was my first exposure to the insane amount of new Sonic.exe content, and I think the same can be said for many other people. The game is being remade from the ground up, but what I did play was pretty good. In terms of the new takes of Sonic.exe, it feels less like a completely new spin on the original game and more like a modernised version. The two playable levels do kind of suffer from being a bit of a walking simulator, but to a considerably lesser extent than its predecessor. It's also, I think, the origin of Lord X, who's become pretty notable among the Sonic.exes. Also, since this might be a recurring thing to note, these games tend to include the player as part of the experience, and as such, love to break the fourth wall. Most of these games will also check the system user to grab the player's name, but when I installed Windows 10, it named my user folder after my personal email address. So if you're wondering why I'm censoring things like that, hi, I don't want demonic hedgehogs To dox me, PC port, even in its current short form demo version, really emphasises the atmosphere over other aspects, which isn't a bad thing and is more or less something you'll begin to see often portrayed in these Sonic.exe fan games. As you run through Hellzone, the more morbid things become, the more the world starts to come alive, which I mean to say in the most fucked up and eldritch way possible. The plants aren't just idly standing by or wilting, they're watching you. The flora in Angel Island is staring and reaching for you, and the coconuts on the now thorny palm trees are carnivorous, eating Alan's tails and locking you out of a vital movement option which, going by the work in progress screenshots on the Game Jolt page, will never return to you. One thing I strongly believe PC port has over the other Sonic.exe fan remakes is how absurdly well executed the Mega Drive-esque crashes are. Not only are the codes that stagnate extremely authentic sounding, but the game even uses the infamous illegal instruction error, an error handler message omnipresent in Mega Drive games and one that absolutely plagued the original Sonic the Hedgehog. This can be easily reproduced in an actual cartridge if you just roll at the end of a Labyrinth Zone act, by the way. The demo ends with Lord X getting pissed off that you're reading someone else's text instead of his, and then he proceeds to ghost you. No, like, you actually can't open the game anymore.
Maybe he comes back and he's like, I hate you, die! Bah! And then he starts screaming and crying and throwing up.
PC port is an extremely good reimagining of the original story that taps into the horror of glitches, something that triggers our fight or flight reactions by presenting us with something we feel like we shouldn't be seeing. Even if glitchy horror aesthetics can be overused, PC port utilises it in a way that makes it feel authentic and weighted. I'm not going to talk about One Last Round in a lot of depth, since a rework is inbound later this month, so I feel like any criticism I make largely won't mean anything, but I'll still note thoughts I have about the game as a whole in ways that I feel will probably pass over into the upcoming demo. One Last Round doesn't focus as much on player interaction as it does making a genuine standalone horror experience, only focusing on the player participant between levels and never really using any of the classic tricks like referring to them by their real name, or in my case doxing my personal email address, which is good since it forces the emphasis on the level design and game feel, which many Sonic.exe fan games don't really do. In terms of the overall aesthetic, it uses a lot of the same tricks that PC port did, such as making the world feel alive, but it goes a little step further in making the world feel less like something being controlled by our demonic hedgehog friend, and more like it's literally part of him. Every unique death also has its own splash screen afterwards, usually with a snarky yet sickeningly dark quote from Sonic himself, which is also fully voiced. In one of those screens he calls me his friend, which means this game gets extra case parasocial points. I understand Sonic.omt's design is objectively pretty good. The various screens of Sonic.omt staring you down between loading zones or with each death scene are absolutely incredible. Pixel art is hard, creating pixel art that genuinely unnerves the player is even harder. So with that said, I have to make one big criticism of his design and of the aesthetic of this game in general. Hole clusters, they're bad. They're a cheap and deeply flawed way of making unsettling horror visuals, and it's really disappointing to see them being used en masse despite the significantly better horror visualization omnipresent throughout the rest of the game. Zeroing in on visual phobias like trypophobia is lazy and makes your media profoundly inaccessible to those who have it. Mr. Pixel is extremely good at creating unsettling aesthetics, so it just bothers me that this crutch is used so often. I assume this is to lean on a spider aesthetic, but spiders only have 8 eyes. I feel like using the word only when talking about 8 eyes makes me sound fucking insane, but also sometimes Sonic.omt bobs around like he's a Friday Night Funkin character, and it kinda takes me out of the experience. Sorry for fixating on that criticism so much, by the way. One Last Round is a genuinely great game, which is why my criticism is so venomous sounding, because I know the game can do better than that. Beyond all that, it's a good game, like a very good fan game. And if you can stomach the parts that I can't, knock yourself out, you're gonna have a lot of fun. Markiplier played this one. Wait, I should probably talk about the game. You're searching for Sonic stuff throughout the internet until you come across an unnamed ROM hack with no info about it whatsoever. Is it just an abandoned buggy ROM hack? Or is there something more to it? Welcome to Sonic the Hedgehog Editable ROM, a game based upon a mysterious ROM hack published onto the internet. Sonic Editable ROM, also known as Sonic.exe or simply EYX, which is likely pronounced IX and will henceforth be referred to as such, portrays itself as a strange and obscure ROM hack. Ever get an odd sense of discomfort from being stared at or feeling like you're being watched? Sonic.exe preys on that hard. An approach like this could feel very ham-fisted and forced, but IX integrates it just enough into the storytelling and visuals that it feels more like an overlying theme and motif than a fabricated way to feel scary. Much like the name Editable ROM implies, IX utilizes emulator-isms, such as loading screens and having overlay messages about the process in the lower left corner of the screen, though there are some analog-esque static effects that kinda take me out of the immersion just a little bit. Another thing I'm not super sure about is this foreground parallax layer. It's fine when the aesthetic shifts at about the halfway point, but when you're in Green Hill Zone, it's like borderline nauseating. After the game's first act, both level-wise and storytelling-wise, the aesthetic changes into a new original one, which really gives it the vibe of a random ROM found online. When it does this, by the way, we get like an analog horror Knuckles thing, and this screenshot of him saying "you make me sick" it lives rent-free in my head. I have it saved in my reaction images folder. A lot of the characters even have very small visual touches that make them look just wrong enough to set you off into the Mr. Incredible Uncanny Valley. The levels past this point are also so damn pretty, although you're often thrown out of the level to be subjected to the horrors. Alongside the eye stuff, the game itself has a strong desire to see the player, so every so often the game will attempt to actually reach out to you, like physically. At one point it tries to break into your internet connection, and at another it tries to hack into your webcam. These are, of course, purely flavor things. The game's not actually trying to do this, but it's an awesome immersive touch. I guess I should also talk about the hedgehog himself. The main creature, IX, is a body horror nightmare in all of the right ways. In accordance to the game's theming, he's a cycloptic lanky beast who looks over people and simply stares at them with those big ol' eyes. His eye takes a lot of forms, but it usually ends up being one ovular shape with a big ass iris, so like an eye. The fleshy parts connecting its upper and lower mouth together, as well as the blood streaming from its eyes. Eyes? Plural? Singular, bitch. As well as the blood streaming from its eye are oddly reminiscent of the veiny part of an eye, and in general his proportions and markings feel oddly evocative of eyeballs in general, even when not intentionally so. Sonic.exe is one of the most unique takes on Sonic.exe I think I've ever seen, both gameplay and character, capitalizing on Sonic's weird freakish one big eye that's two eyes look to make this absolute creature, and even an entire game aesthetic around it is insanely cool. By the way, the design for my mascot issue was partially inspired by Sonic.exe. Do you like it? Do you like them? I am running out of time to write this video, so I need to make this one as quick as possible. Back in 2010, the Sonic ROM hacking community was told of an unknown ROM found near an abandoned nursery in a horribly tattered condition. The ROM was eventually dumped, but wasn't very well liked due to its poor controls, lack of enemies and buggy collisions, and it was taken offline later that very same year. However, one unnamed user managed to salvage the ROM for themselves, and when playing it, they learned shockingly fast that the game wasn't just a buggy mess. It was a glitchy mess too. Sonic.unl, much like IX, utilises the obscure ROM backdrop, though it takes the more rudimentary approach of making collisions in physics that don't make a terrible amount of sense. It's hard to make a game this buggy on purpose, so I assume a lot of what went into making this aesthetic work was happy little accidents, or just a case of it's not a bug, it's a feature. It's hard to say a lot about this game because I think it just speaks for itself. Sonic.unl as a creature looks great, the amateur look of it and the way it contorts when it animates. It's just great that it moves so unnaturally and generally doesn't give a shit. An aspect of the game's presentation I really like is how it genuinely comes across like it's unfinished. Not in the sense that it looks bad, but in the sense that everything is you know, just a little bit off. Songs are missing percussion, aren't played at the right BPM or key, characters move just a little choppier than they're supposed to, and have stray pixels on their sprites that aren't present in the final games. It all feels very intentional. When things take a darker turn, the stylization comes out in full flux. Things still have an unclean look about them, but as the game progresses, they steadily become more and more tangible, like they've always looked that way. It's like UNL is some sort of miasma that steadily adapts itself more and more to the environment surrounding it, and even if that wasn't the intent, the fact that the art style can be evocative of thoughts like that is no small deal at all. If I had any criticisms, I think that it's that Sonic.unl himself sometimes looks too weird. When he turns to face the player at the end of the Knuckles segment in particular, I kind of feel it's a bit messy looking in a wronger way. I'd also nitpick at the awkward janky collisions, but something is a feature. Let's end on a... do I want to say high note? Deprived Hedgehog 1994 is a game I feel absurdly conflicted about. It has encrypted bonus content that you can open after finishing the game, but I'm not going to talk about that since you can just play it yourself. The game opens with Sonic running in a black room with the background noise of some bitch who won't stop crying in the background. Like, you touch a Chaos Emerald and this message comes up saying, "My friends," meaning this Sonic also gets parasocial points. Dude, you can't just say that. That's 5 parasocial points docked. He asks for my help and then he screams in my ear with this image, and can I just say, this pic fucking rocks. Look at him, he is so shapes. He's a real merrymaker, a carny, a rapscallion if you will, and you know what? I'd go as far as to say, he's a pinhead. I love it, I love everything about it. I would print this image out if I could. Oh. What the fuck? Dude, that's so much ink. And all because I asked to see him. Why, Kay? Oh my god, are the viewers too young to get that joke? Do people know printer joke? The game, I think, maybe takes too many liberties with the player's computer, opening web pages, playing audio while the game is closed, and even going as far as to, as you can see, use the player's printer. And what's worse, the pure black background is actually consistent with the image it prints. This damn thing practically uses all of your black ink in one fell swoop the moment you boot the thing up, and I would say that's probably worse than malware. The game tells a story which I personally don't find all that engaging, through pop-up messages and again for web pages opening. Thank you, Deprived Hedgehog, for telling me what a hospital is. I don't want to let the story get in the way of the cool things about the game though. Even if it is a bit overzealous, the ways it interacts as a player is novel, and the ending opening an unlisted video that actually clues you into the slightest context as to what the fuck is going on is nice. I also really like I forgot to put this in the script, I really like the lo-fi takes, like the down-pitched lo-fi takes on a bunch of the songs. It's very liminal. The art is probably some of my favourite in the games I've reviewed in this video. The exaggerated proportions of the characters in each illustration gives the game's cast a bit of a fucked up rubber hose vibe that I can't help but love. So good on you, Deprived Hedgehog. Please, maybe have a white background next time you're gonna print shit, okay? Of course, with a video like this, I'm not really trying to make any grand point or sell you on something. I more or less just wanted to appreciate a faucet of my teenage years that I honestly thought had died with me. There are games I wanted to talk about, but obviously couldn't because I'm on a pretty tight schedule this month, but I'm going to try to play those at a later date. That later date in question being the Thursday on the week this video drops, over on my Twitch channel or the real Yoko's channel. So if you missed the stream, the VOD will be up on my VOD channel and also his VOD channel, so you get twice the VOD, you have no fucking excuse. Also, if you want, you should follow my VOD channel. And who knows, if people want it, maybe I'll do a round 2 of this video with the other ones people want me to look at. You want me to talk about Project X? Of course you do! I wanted to talk about it too, I'm not gonna lie. But for now, I'm going to retreat back into my own little program folder and hibernate for now. If you want to be like Sonic.omt and farm your parasocial points, consider liking, subscribing and peeping my Discord and socials. Enjoy the rest of Halloween Channel 2, as a reminder we've got new vids every week for the month of October, and you can check my Twitch out for the flavorfully spooky streams all month.
You're watching Channel 2 KWAK TV.